Hi everyone, so this is a video I want to do in response to a recent video Matt Walsh produced on his Matt Walsh show or something of the sort on YouTube. I came across it last night and I thought it was pretty thought-provoking. So the video that Matt Walsh made, I'll link it below, was in response to this apparently super famous, popular podcast that I had never heard of. Thank God I'm very sheltered, called Call Her Daddy. Which is, I guess, an amalgamation of, relationship and sex advice with mental health things, and apparently it's the most listened to podcast by women, I guess, in America, or something like that. Okay, so his video said, Call Her Daddy proves why feminism is actually dangerous for women. I won't go too much into depth about that whole video, except that he basically pulled out one little part of her recent video or her recent podcast where she explained this whole story of going to meet a guy in Paris who she didn't know, she met online, and ended up being a terrible experience. And the part that people have been talking about apparently is when she says, why did she stay for a week with that guy when it was clearly there was no chemistry or interest? So she says because she was just uncomfortable and confused and didn't really know what to do. And because he wasn't doing anything, she was like, I don't want to make him feel worse. So she just kind of stayed until the week was over and went home. And so what Matt Walsh brings out is that there's this dynamic, a natural dynamic of gender complementarity, a balance between male and female, in which the man is the leader and the woman is the follower. And so what this woman on this podcast was basically revealing is that she needed him to lead this uncomfortable situation, and because he wasn't, she was unsure what to do. She basically needed guidance and advice and direction, which in a situation where it was just her and this guy, he needed to provide that. And what Matt Walsh brings out, which first of all, I'm not really into political ideological dogmatism, which is the thing now, to be super radical left about everything or completely fundamentally right wing about everything. I think it's a false dynamic. I think most people fall somewhere in the middle. Unfortunately, that's not part of the media landscape of nuance. So something that I cherish about Hasidus, about Jewish mysticism, is that it provides us with nuance. In fact, most concepts in Jewish mysticism are paradoxical, complex, and can hold opposites at once. Because the higher up you go in reality, the more and more close to a God perspective you could have, you are able to hold and contain things that seem on a lower level to be contradictory. Because the truth of God is that God holds many different pieces together at once and is a perfect unity of oneness, whereas us in our world, everything is pretty complex and broken and fragmented. So too with this conversation about gender, women, feminism, and the role of men and masculinity in our society. It's super not clear at this point in history how we should move forward with the way gender should function in society. Okay, so let me explain a little bit more. Matt Walsh, throughout the episode, makes these sweeping claims about quote-unquote feminists and feminism, which I think is useful for his particular pundit style, but it really conceals a lot of the complexity of this conversation about women and men. Because feminism has accomplished tremendously important, essential things for women in society. You go back 100 years and women lacked a lot of the basic things that we consider to be parts of being a full member of society, like the right to vote, the right to get a divorce, to own property, to have political representation beyond just voting, but also to be in politics and local or national. I could go on and on and on, being able to be in universities. I mean, literally almost all aspects of public life were closed off to women, besides very wealthy white women who were married or had some connection to a famous man. So the fact that women have a voice now in society is tremendously important, and I think it would be close-minded to not thank feminism for those successes. And we have to look at kind of how feminism has evolved in the past, I would say 20 years, to kind of figure out why it's really gone off the rails. And I think a big part of that is that feminism, because of the issues with identity politics and queer theory, basically stopped being able to talk about women. And that's a really big problem for a social justice movement that in the beginning had some pretty clear and important goals, and now a lot of those goals have been accomplished, and yet society continues to maintain some of those icky parts, and unfortunately a lot of those parts come back to male-female relationships. And that is an area where feminists have not been able to fundamentally change a lot of things, and I think that for thinking people, it's obviously because these are biological functions of being human, and they're not completely social functions. So, but again, there's the nuance. Where does it go from human instinct, human nature, biological imperative for reproduction, like that kind of animalistic side? And then when do we move into like the social side of how male and female become social terms? And for me personally, in my work, that is the crux of the question. At what point can we piece apart the essential ontological roles of men and women, or experiences or identity of men and women, with the very transitory, historically dependent, contextual, sociological roles of men and women? And these two things are often overlapping, and then it becomes really clear when they're not in accordance. And feminism now, as it's moved past kind of traditional views of women, or even traditional, when I say traditional views of women, I'm talking about just seeing women as partners with men in society, and primarily as mothers. The vast majority of women are mothers or experience having a child. And so when they've kind of moved past those like pretty baseline essential things about being a woman into this kind of realm where like everything's up for grabs and being a woman is anything you want it to be, which is kind of sad. It's kind of like a depressing move to go into, because I felt very much when I was in my 20s and I was looking at the big wide world, for people to keep telling me you can be anything you want, or being a woman means everything and anything. What that really comes down to is that it means nothing in particular. And nothingness is very easily slides into neutrality, and the neutral in our society is masculine. So if you follow this logic, we go from having something unique and valued about being a woman to coming full circle to women embodying masculine and male roles in society. And as a Hasidic woman who's very invested in the Jewish view of womanhood, it always tries to bring together, I will always try to bring together the essential ontological role of women with a social perspective. Okay, so after that very long interlude, let's go back to what Matt Walsh said. So when he was talking about a man being a leader and a woman being a follower, I think those are really poor choice of terms, because any feminist, and I'm one of them, would be like, ugh, like I definitely don't want to see myself always as a follower, because a leader and a follower in English, those terms are very hierarchical, and they're very charged in terms of authority and power. And a leader makes to get choices that followers have to follow, whether or not they like it. So let's look at these terms in Hasidus for a minute. Okay, so we have two different types of leaders in Hasidus. In Jewish mysticism, you have a Shel and a Melech. A Shel is a ruler, let's call it a ruler, and a Melech is a king. Okay, so let's describe these two for a moment, and then we're going to kind of pull it back to the male-female dynamic. Okay, so a Shel, a ruler, wants to rule. That person, let's just say he for now, he has a really strong desire to rule over other people. And basically he'll use any of his resources to accomplish that, whether it's wealth, reputation, power, social capital, all of the resources that he will use those to gain that authority over others. And part of that might be to give to others or be nice to others, but that side of it will be limited to the extent that he gains authority over them. Okay, a melech, a king, does not want to be a ruler over the people, because the king understands that that is a massive amount of responsibility, and that level of inner awareness and intelligence naturally leads a person to humility. And someone who's humble thinks, who am I to lead other people? That doesn't make any sense. I'm just a person. Why should I have power over others? Okay, so what draws the king from his inner world of humility and self-effacement to coming to that place of ruling over others? It is only through the desire of the followers of the people. When the people see in the king the ability to be a ruler and the greatness of the king, they naturally start to honor the king. And they turn to the king and they call out from within him his desire to rule. So they're constantly doing things which increase the honor of the king. And at some point, the king realizes the desires awaken in him that he wants to rule over the people, because he sees that's his mission, his goal, his being. And so when he starts giving to the people, when he starts giving of himself and being nice to people, it's not a limited amount to the extent that he gains authority. He didn't want authority in the first place. What he does is he gives over his entire essence to the people. Okay, so in Hasidic theology, this refers to, the king refers to God. And every Rosh Hashana, every new year, the Jewish people, we come to God and we crown him king and we say, we want you to rule. We want you to be king of the world. Okay, so how does this go back to the leader-follower dynamic that Matt Walsh was discussing in his video? So in a male-female relationship, the masculine is the giver and the female is the receiver. No, the masculine is not the king and the female is the people or the follower. It's not leader-follower relationship. It is giver and receiver. Okay, because the receiver has a really, really vital role. And what's interesting, I'm going to read one line from this book. I always bring a source. God willing, when I'm making these videos, I'll always bring a source for what I'm talking about. So the source here is from this book. Divine Speech is the English title, and the Hebrew is from Hemshech, a series of Hasidic discourses in the year 1898, which in Hebrew is called RaNaT. And it is all about the giver-receiver dynamic. Okay, and so the heart of this Hasidic discourse in this part, the Rebbe, here I'm quoting, the Rebbe, I'm going to go to the English part in the beginning. It's a summary. Okay, the Rebbe compares the female to speech. Just as the female is superior to that from which she receives, so too speech is superior to that from which it receives, namely the mind and emotion that speech articulates. Okay. This is a fascinating concept that I could do a whole video about on its own, and God willing, I will in the future. But I'm just going to kind of draw out and highlight this one part. The female is superior to that from which she receives. Okay, so yes, men need to be leaders. Men need to be givers. Men need to be, like the king, humble, self-aware, and generous. Okay, and so that is the male's role, the man's role in society. However, if we're going to look at this as a hierarchy and you have the man here and he is bestowing, giving of himself to the receiver, and we're going to have the receiver here being a female cup. So the female is superior ultimately from the one she receives from. Okay, so we have this hierarchy where if we're looking at externally the dynamic between male and female, you have the man giving and the female receiving, okay? But let's think about what is the female receiving and what does she do with it? So we're going to use the biological example here. The male gives a seed, the female receives the seed, combines with the egg, and creates a person. A person, a baby, is infinitely, incomparably, and indescribably greater than the seed from the man. The female, in her superiority, has created something that the male could never create. However, she depends upon him as the initiator. Okay, so the female reaches up to her source, which is infinitely higher than the male, to draw down that new life into the world. So what does this mean in society, just to wrap it up? So we do need a feminism that empowers men and honors men because of the masculine nature. That is essential to creating a healthy society. And men's base nature, and like I'm speaking in way generalizations here, this does not apply to everybody, but the goals of feminism and the goals of, kind of social media pundits or talking faces like Matt Walsh is ideally to look at society as a whole and create models and structures and ways of thinking and paradigms that will serve the whole. And that will ultimately create a better world. That's what we all want. So what we need to do is understand the male-female dynamic in order to allow that to happen. And so how we move into that next step is by recognizing this dynamic, the male as the giver, as leader, like he was saying. And he has a whole side thing about women wanting to be leaders and then not taking the responsibility of being leaders, but it's not exactly the case because kind of paradigmatically, the woman can't step into that role full time. A woman can always take on that role to be the giver in any relationship, but not all the time because she will burn out because she's not connected to her source. So a woman needs to be connected to that source of receiving and then creating something greater. So I feel like this is the tip of the iceberg, and I want to go on, but I think that I made my point, and I hope it was clear. And I would love to engage with any of my listeners. Please just drop me a note in the comments if you had thoughts, if you had areas that you would like to learn more about or were unclear, or if you disagreed and wanted me to explain something in a different way or better. I hope that we can kind of continue developing this conversation.